I was taken into custody on the 2nd of January 2026, following a failed attempt to undermine and overthrow the sitting administration. My involvement began roughly a fortnight prior, when I received a communication from Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, who was operating via a Togolese telephone number. That audio recording you just heard is the raw, unfiltered admission of a military insider now detained as a key figure in this conspiracy. This individual was a central cog in an elaborate machinery of treason, a plot specifically engineered to liquidate Captain Ibrahim Traoré at point-blank range and hurl our fraternal republic back into the abyss of instability and foreign subservience. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow patriots, I urge you to take a moment and truly absorb the gravity of this situation. We need your undivided attention right now because the information we are breaking is far more significant than your standard daily headline. We are looking at a bone-chilling exposé regarding the sheer scale of logistics, financing, and planning dedicated to the elimination of a single target. That target is the head of state, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. The testimony provided by Air Force Captain Prosper Kudati, apprehended on January 2nd, 2026, outlines a scenario that rivals the plot of any blockbuster espionage film. Yet the danger here is terrifyingly tangible. We are not talking about fiction. We are gambling with the safety of millions of Burkinabè citizens and the very destiny of independent African governance. During his formal interrogation by state security services, Captain Kudati laid out a schematic so precise and methodically calculated that it defies belief. The details are enough to rattle the bones of any observer who stands firm in the belief that Africa has the absolute right to determine its own future. Per the official confession, the initial recruitment occurred roughly 14 days prior to his capture, initiated by none other than the former interim president, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, precisely the very same figure who once commanded the highest office in Burkina Faso before his eventual removal from power. However, fellow citizens, this narrative takes a significantly darker and more treacherous path from this point forward. The mastermind Damiba is not operating from within our borders. This self-styled leader is reportedly pulling the strings of carnage and devastation against his own homeland while safely ensconced in Togo, enjoying the protection of foreign exile. Pause and reflect on the reality of our world. In 2026, we are witnessing alleged patriots and statesmen sitting comfortably in foreign capitals while drafting plans for war. They are actively conspiring to assassinate incumbent leaders and shatter the peace of their own nations, driven solely by a lust for personal dominion and authority. Does such a man spare a single thought for the hard-working agrarian struggling in the fields to put bread on the table for his kin? Is there any concern for the young female student braving security risks to secure an education, or the children who have a fundamental human right to mature in a country that is free and stable? The uncomfortable truth, my friends, is an emphatic and undeniable negative. His only objective is the acquisition of the throne, regardless of the cost, even if that price is paid in the spilled blood of his fellow countrymen. What elevates this conspiracy from a mere threat to a high-level crisis is the terrifying degree of operational security and tradecraft adopted by these rogue actors. We are not discussing a clumsy scheme drafted over beer in a dimly lit tavern. That is not the case here. This was a military-grade operation that leveraged cutting-edge digital tools specifically to slip past our defensive radars. Captain Kudati's sworn testimony indicates that to ensure total airtight secrecy, the conspirators were strictly mandated to communicate exclusively through end-to-end encrypted applications, namely Zangi and Signal. While these platforms were built with the intention of safeguarding user privacy and securing dialogue against unwanted surveillance, and while they are vital tools for legitimate journalists, human rights activists, and private citizens protecting their data, when wielded by those with malicious intent, they are weaponized into covert channels for treason and insurgency. The strategic foresight is undeniable, is it not? These individuals were desperate to prevent their digital footprint from being intercepted. They were fully aware that the Burkinabè intelligence community was vigilant, monitoring the airwaves to shield the Republic from harm. Consequently, they operated in the shadows, exploiting technology to cloak their seditious agenda, which reveals a critical fact. It confirms that our national intelligence was active, and the plotters knew they were walking a razor's edge where one slip meant capture. The digital dialogue between the alleged members of this sleeper cell was defined by what Kudati termed as extreme operational caution. Communications were set to self-destruct immediately after viewing. Furthermore, on the Signal app, direct contact between the primary leaders was strictly avoided. To add layers of insulation, all messages were routed through a cutout handler using the alias King David, who has since been identified as Captain Ouedraogo David, currently operating out of Ghana. Once again, fellow citizens, I implore you to recognize the recurring theme in this investigation. We see yet another hostile actor staging operations from abroad, utilizing the territory of another African state as a launch pad for chaos against a neighbor. This represents the modern insidious evolution of neo-colonial warfare. It involves exiled figures serving as remote-controlled proxies to sabotage progressive administrations that have the courage to reject external domination. Regarding the Zangi application, Damiba allegedly enforced even stricter protocols. Kudati claims that if a dispatch wasn't viewed within a 10-minute window, the colonel would personally purge it. The entire workflow was engineered to result in a digital ghost town, no metadata, no archives, and absolutely no paper trail that prosecutors could seize upon. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we must pivot to the monetary engine driving this machine. This aspect of the investigation exposes the deep pockets fueling the aggression against African sovereignty, and the revelations are nothing short of scandalous. Breaking developments confirm that Captain Cardi has formally admitted to accepting a significant financial bribe, specifically a sum of 8 million CFA francs, which was clandestinely channeled to him through none other than his own sibling. Pause and consider the gravity of that admission. The conspirators sank so low as to weaponize familial bonds, turning blood relatives into unsuspecting mules for cash destined to spill blood. Official records state that this disgraced officer brazenly pocketed a substantial portion of the funds, retaining 3 million CFA francs solely for his own private gratification. This occurred just prior to his dispersal of the remaining 5 million CFA francs to various other compromised elements embedded within the treachery network. The burning question on everyone's mind right now is simple yet critical. What is the origin of these illicit finances, and who exactly bankrolled this violent bid for power? As previously guaranteed, we are about to unveil intelligence that will shake you to your core, confirmed directly by the explosive testimony provided by the Burkinabè Minister of Security. However, we can confirm immediately that the financial trail points unmistakably toward external puppeteers, who still view sovereign independent African leadership as an existential threat to their geopolitical dominance. At the very heart of the mission handed down to Captain Cardi lay a calculated and high-value military target essential to the nation's stability. This specific detail exposes the sophisticated level of planning and tactical foresight that went into this attempted insurrection. His primary directive was to completely incapacitate the Sapane drone facility, arguably the most vital component of Burkina Faso's modern aerial defense grid. The command was issued using chillingly coded cryptography that disguised its savagery, "Sever the head of the pastor." Do not be mistaken, this had absolutely nothing to do with religion. Intelligence confirms that the pastor was the operational pseudonym for Captain Passer, the commanding officer in charge of the drone installation. Within the twisted logic of this conspiracy, as allegedly masterminded by Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, this specific facility stood as the singular insurmountable barrier to their success. It was deemed imperative that this site be neutralized before the primary phase of the coup could even be initiated. The reasoning is sound in military terms, as modern conflicts, including government overthrows, are inevitably fought under the unblinking gaze of aerial reconnaissance. These unmanned aerial vehicles possess the capability to track troop mobilization, instantly deliver real-time battlefield data, and orchestrate counterstrikes. For the insurrectionists to have any hope of victory, they effectively needed to gouge out the eyes of the Burkinabè military command. It was the only way to ensure their rogue ground forces could maneuver across the terrain without triggering immediate detection and aerial interception. So when exactly was this treasonous plot set to unfold? Corroborated investigative sources indicate the grand assault was clocked for the night of January 3rd, 2026, specifically at 2300 hours. This was the precise 0 hour chosen to launch the lethal strike intended to assassinate Captain Ibrahim Traoré and effectively decapitate the state's entire hierarchy. Furthermore, Captain Cardi's deposition sheds light on a classic feature of espionage and covert warfare, a strictly compartmentalized chain of command. This methodology is fundamental, essentially textbook tradecraft for organizing a seditious conspiracy. The strategy relies on keeping operatives in silos, ensuring that no individual other than the supreme ringleader possesses the complete operational picture, thereby preventing total collapse if one agent is apprehended. Authorities allege that the strings were being pulled from a shadowy command center located safely beyond the national borders. Damiba, securely positioned in foreign territory, was reportedly the sole architect who understood the identity and function of every player on the chessboard. He alone held the master key to the division of labor and the tactical responsibilities assigned to each cell. Meanwhile, the foot soldiers executing the dangerous work on the ground were kept in what intelligence experts refer to as a complete information blackout. Consider the profound cynicism of this arrangement, fellow. Citizens, military personnel, and civilians were recruited into a high-stakes gambit that promised prison or death. Yet incredibly, these recruits were denied knowledge of the true magnitude and ultimate objectives of the plot they were serving. They were utilized as mere cannon-fodder expendable pawns, sacrificed by a mastermind who faced zero physical danger while lounging in exile. Upon the conclusion of his interrogation, Captain Prosper Cardi resorted to the typical behavior of a cornered felon once the scheme has unraveled. He verbally expressed deep contrition for his betrayal. He formally petitioned for leniency from President Ibrahim Traoré, the citizens of Burkina Faso, and his own military superiors. The audacity of such a request is genuinely staggering. We are speaking of an individual who was fully prepared to facilitate the murder of his head of state and open fire upon his own brothers in arms at the Saponay garrison. After accepting millions in bribes to fund high treason, he now has the gall to beg for absolution. One is forced to question whether this sorrow is born of a guilty conscience, or simply the panic of a traitor realizing the severity of the punishment awaiting him. However, it is important to note that prior to Cardi's confession hitting the airwaves, Security Minister Mahamadou Sana had already addressed the nation. He had already detonated a metaphorical bombshell regarding the sheer scale and malicious nature of this subversive plot. In a briefing that has sent shockwaves throughout the African continent, Minister Sana meticulously outlined the terrifying specifics planned for that dark night in January. The minister confirmed that the conspirators had synchronized their watches to commence the operation at exactly 2300 hours. The opening move of this violent playbook was to be the immediate physical elimination of the President Captain Ibrahim Traoré. The tactics devised to achieve this aim were nothing short of barbaric. Intelligence reports indicate the assassins were instructed to either execute President Traoré at point-blank range or to demolish his residence with heavy explosives to ensure no survivors. This plot was never intended to be a sterile transition of power marked by formal detentions and press releases. Instead, intelligence indicates a cold-blooded liquidation strategy, a calculated assassination meant to plunge the state into absolute mayhem and immediate paralysis. However, the conspirators' blueprints for destruction extended far beyond the elimination of a single target. Following the proposed execution of the head of state, the kill list allegedly widened to include key military commanders and civilian leaders, effectively a systematic purge intended to wipe out any potential opposition capability before it could mobilize. Their tactical roadmap included a preemptive strike to disable the drone operations center, a move calculated to blind the defense forces, just as foreign commandos were scheduled to initiate boots-on-the-ground interventions. Pause for a moment to consider the sheer magnitude of this undertaking, the intricate coordination, the financial backing, and the breathtaking recklessness needed to even conceptualize an operation of this magnitude. The perpetrators were evidently prepared to drag the entire country into a bloodbath, showing zero hesitation about slaughtering their fellow citizens to achieve their ends. Their ultimate objective was to dismantle the fragile stability Burkina Faso has painstakingly constructed, sacrificing national peace, merely to feed the ego and power hunger of a single individual desperate to reclaim the throne. Security Minister Mahamadou Sana was explicit in his briefing, noting that strict operational security protocols prevent the release of every detail while the inquiry remains active. Consequently, he limited his disclosure to identifying only the primary architect at the heart of this seditious scheme. As corroborated by the admissions of Captain Kinder, the mastermind has been identified as Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, the nation's former interim leader who is currently believed to be evading justice within the borders of Togo. Minister Sana's report portrays Damiba not as a passive figurehead, but as the central nervous system of the entire operation, handling every critical aspect of the coup attempt. His alleged role encompassed the complete tactical design of the assault, alongside the critical responsibility of sourcing and distributing the financial capital required to fuel the insurrection. Furthermore, he was directly involved in cultivating a network of operatives, seducing both civilian assets and military servicemen to betray their oaths and join the conspiracy. Remember, we are speaking of a figure who previously occupied the presidential palace, a man who swore a solemn vow to defend the Republic and safeguard its people from harm. Yet today, comfortably ensconced in foreign exile, he appears to be orchestrating the very annihilation of the state he once promised to serve. We now turn to the most explosive element of this investigation, the financial trail, which promises to reveal shocking truths about the external forces at play. According to the official dossier presented by Minister Sana, the insurrection was not self-funded. Rather, it relied heavily on capital injected from international sources. In a pointed accusation, the minister highlighted a transaction originating from the Ivory Coast, involving a final transfer sum of roughly 70 million CFA francs, equivalent to nearly 125,000 United States dollars. Allow the gravity of that allegation to sink in. Funds flowing from a neighboring ally were reportedly weaponized to bankroll the assassination of a sitting African president. The Ivory Coast, a nation with deep historical and fraternal ties, is now implicated as the financial pipeline for an operation explicitly designed to plunge Burkina Faso into chaos. This revelation forces us to confront uncomfortable realities and ask difficult questions about the state of continental solidarity. Does the ancient philosophy of brotherhood still hold, or have certain territories transformed into launching pads for neo-colonial sabotage and foreign intervention? Is it possible that external powers are manipulating specific African regimes to undercut those governments that dare to assert their independence and reject compliant subservience? We must ask ourselves who truly reaps the rewards when a leader fighting for genuine national sovereignty and self-determination is violently removed from the geopolitical chessboard. The emerging evidence seems to validate the long-standing warnings issued by Pan-African scholars regarding the fragility of post-colonial independence. History shows that whenever a statesman rejects puppetry, denies the plunder of national resources, and ignores the mandates of former imperial masters, a target is inevitably painted on their back. The arsenal deployed against these dissenters has evolved beyond mere economic blockades or diplomatic isolation. It has escalated to kinetic measures, violent coups, and targeted assassinations funded through regional channels to mask the true origin of the hostility. Minister Sana has provided assurances that the dragnet is still widening with ongoing investigations and further apprehensions expected in the coming days. The government's explicitly stated objective is to ensure every single conspirator is dragged before a tribunal to answer for their treasonous actions. While emphasizing that the security apparatus has fully contained the threat, he urged the citizenry to remain vigilant and avoid being manipulated into supporting such treacherous agendas. This communication strategy is critical at such a volatile juncture in the national narrative. During times of high-stakes exposure and national crisis, bad actors invariably attempt to exploit the uncertainty by spreading disinformation and inciting public panic. The minister's appeal is for steadfast composure, reliance on official state channels, and a rejection of the psychological warfare often employed during coup attempts. Furthermore, he committed to declassifying and broadcasting the video confessions of captured accomplices, providing irrefutable proof to the public. It appears the administration is weaponizing radical transparency, using these admissions to lay bare the mechanics of the plot and the identities of those who sought to dismantle the state. Embedded within Minister Sana's briefing was a vital contextual reminder for the international community. This background is essential for comprehending exactly why President Traoré has become such a high-priority target for these hostile entities. Over the last 3 years, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has steered the nation toward what officials term endogenous development, a path of absolute sovereignty rooted in a distinct Pan-Africanist ideology. Let us be clear, this is far more than empty political posturing or mere slogans. Traoré symbolizes the vanguard of a rising generation of African commanders who categorically reject the antiquated geopolitical rulebook. He advocates for authentic autonomy, insisting that national growth must spring from internal capabilities rather than foreign charity, championing the doctrine of African solutions for African challenges. He has boldly confronted the status quo by demanding the departure of foreign military contingents stationed within his borders. Moreover, he has scrutinized and dismantled economic agreements that disproportionately favor external corporations at the expense of the Burkinabè citizenry. It is precisely this defiance that has cemented his immense popularity, resonating not only within Burkina Faso, but echoing across the continent and throughout the global diaspora. Across the vast expanse of the continent, the younger generation views him as a beacon of hope. A visionary leader who articulates their deepest ambitions, refuses to capitulate, and possesses the audacity to envision a genuinely sovereign Africa. However, this unyielding posture has simultaneously painted a target on his back, designating him as a primary adversary to those whom the minister described as imperialist powers and their domestic proxies. We are speaking of those foreign entities that continue to reap massive profits from the systemic subjugation of African nations aided and abetted by internal conspirators. These local agents effectively function as the operational middlemen for offshore interests, trading their nation's sovereignty for their own private financial gain. It is crucial to remember that this latest development is far from the first time hostile actors have sought to forcibly dismantle Traoré's administration through a coup d'état. As highlighted by the Minister's security forces have neutralized multiple similar conspiracies, a testament to the heightened alertness of Burkina Faso's intelligence apparatus. Yet this exposes a deeply disturbing and recurring narrative. What we are witnessing is a relentless coordinated campaign designed to eliminate this leadership by utilizing any available method, no matter how drastic. This thwarted insurrection triggers a series of urgent inquiries that demand immediate attention from African citizens, civil society groups, and regional institutions such as the African Union and ECOWAS, as well as the global community. The first pressing question revolves around the role of the Togolese Republic in this unfolding diplomatic crisis. If the allegations hold true that former President Damiba is utilizing Togolese soil as a command center to orchestrate a violent regime change next door, what conclusions must be drawn regarding Togo's dedication to maintaining regional peace? It is a fundamental principle of international relations that no African state should permit its sovereign territory to be transformed into a safe harbor for conspirators and would-be assassins plotting the destruction of fellow African governments. Furthermore, we must scrutinize the involvement of Côte d'Ivoire. If the financial capital fueling this treasonous plot flowed through Ivorian banking channels, who exactly authorized and processed these transactions? Are we looking at private citizens operating in a rogue capacity? Or does the evidence suggest the complicity of institutional players within the system? The administration in Yamoussoukro and its financial regulatory bodies are now obligated to provide the entire region with a clear explanation regarding how their banking infrastructure was reportedly exploited to bankroll a murder plot. Thirdly, the investigation points toward Ghana, identified as the base of operations for Captain Ouedraogo David, the liaison notoriously referred to as King David. The public deserves to know his current status. Is he still residing within Ghanaian borders, or has he been taken into custody by authorities? Is the Ghanaian government offering full cooperation to Burkinabè detectives, ladies and gentlemen? These are not merely rhetorical questions. These issues strike at the very core of African sovereignty, questioning whether we truly honor each other's borders and the right to self-governance, or if our nations are merely being manipulated as expendable pieces on a chessboard controlled by distant external powers. To my fellow brothers and sisters spanning the continent and the diaspora, understand that the report I am delivering today is far more than a simple news story. This is not a theoretical exercise in political science. It is a harsh realization that the battle for Africa's genuine liberation is an ongoing, unfinished process. It is a fight that is challenged at every juncture, often evolving into a brutal struggle between life and death. Captain Ibrahim Traoré remains amongst the living today solely because the intelligence community successfully intercepted this scheme. But we must ask what happens when the next attempt is made. What fate awaits other African heads of state who dare to defend their national sovereignty? How many of these clandestine plots remain hidden from public view? How many times have such conspiracies succeeded in toppling progressive reformers only to install obedient puppets in their place? We must transition from being passive observers of the news cycle to becoming active participants in shaping the destiny of our continent by asking the uncomfortable questions. It is imperative that we insist on absolute transparency and extend our unwavering support to those who are on the front lines fighting for our collective freedom. Simultaneously, we must unmask and resist those who function as tools for our continued oppression, for the destiny of Burkina Faso is inextricably linked to the destiny of Africa itself. Make no mistake, when they target Traoré, they are taking aim at every single one of us who dreams of a liberated, self-sufficient, and thriving continent. Let our response be swift and unified. The struggle continues, and victory is the only option.